Hello, Isaac.
Hello, Rabbi. It's great to see you. Happy Shabbos.
Happy before Shabbos. If it was the Sabbath, I wouldn't be using electricity or the
Yeah,
computer.
okay.
So,
Well, fair
so we
enough.
say like happy Erev Shabbat, which would mean like happy, get ready for Shabbat,
Okay, good.
Or I guess we don't really say happy, like happy Merry Christmas, but putting that aside. So we actually finished, thank God, the story of the healing of the paralytic. And that happened in Capernaum. And what happens, I think, moments later, unless the New Testament tells us we're still in Capernaum, I think people assume you're still in Capernaum, but it's kind of unclear. I think in general, we could tell when Jesus floats through the Transjordan area versus Judea versus the Galilee, especially when it mentions the Sea of Galilee, but sometimes it's hard to know exactly where he is. So this will let you jump right into the verse.
Well, yeah, on that note, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 9, verse 9. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him.
Wow, this guy Matthew is a great listener. That's first thing. We talked about in the past. Are you a good listener? So we said that when the paralytic he was told to go home in Matthew, he went home, and Levi said, "Follow me," and he followed. And just to make two more parallels, we mentioned earlier that the scribe, when he said, "Follow me," and do not go visit your dead anymore, he followed. And in regards, I guess the last parallel we had was with St. Peter's mother-in-law, where he didn't say anything and she kind of served him. We did have two mentions, obviously, earlier of two other apostles, two other disciples. So it's
The
kind of unclear.
Peter and John, the first disciples, right? He said, "Follow me," and then they would leave the follow.
Yeah, yeah. So it's unclear about like, is he trying to pick it up? So you said Simon and Peter, right? I thought you said John, but Simon,
No,
Simon, yeah.
Simon Peter.
Simon, who's obviously called Peter, and Andrew, his brother. That's how it's called in Matthew, right?
Mhm.
So it's going to be Simon, who's called Peter, the double name we talked about, and Andrew. That's also by the Sea of Galilee. And don't forget that Capernaum is on the Sea of Galilee. And it's unclear about how much he's trying to pick up disciples. We spoke about in the past. So instead of talking about that, I want to go through this verse and just break down a couple of concepts that I think are very, very important. So number one, what's this guy's name?
Matthew. Matthew.
Okay, so and do you think of him as anything else? Like in the book I'm using, this says the story of Levi.
Levi, yeah. So a few places, in few books, he's called Levi.
Right.
But is that the Hebrew name for
Oh yeah,
Matthew?
so in Hebrew, it's interesting. The V in Hebrew would be a W. So historically, it would
Levi.
probably pronounce Lewi, something like that. But today, we say Levi, and Levi, I think, would be like the colloquial English way that we would refer to that. So when we see in Mark 2:13, Jesus went out again beside the sea, the whole crowd gathered, and then in 2:14, we see he saw Levi, son of Alpheus, sitting at a tax booth. And then Luke, we also see in 5:29, then Levi gave a great, oh, sorry, I skipped one. And then we see in 5:27, he saw a tax collector named Levi. So one time we have Levi, the son of Alphaeus, that's Mark. One time we have Levi, which is the one in Luke. And then in Matthew, we have Matthew, the famous Matthew. So the first question I would ask for you, Isaac, is this all the same guy?
Um, well, that's a great question. I would say Jesus has this very interesting take on people. I mean, the fact that he was a tax booth, that tells me he's tax, which means he was a tax collector, which means he was then an agent of the Roman government trying to harass the sort of people to collect taxes. And so the fact that Jesus would call someone again, that he called him out, that a guy who is in some ways, how do I say this? Lack of empathy, a very self-centered person who only in a way cared about himself. That stands out. But to your point, are they all the same people? I
Yeah,
don't.
so we talk about sometimes that I guess when we look at the way that Matthew is written, most people will look at marking and priority, which means that Mark was the earliest text, and then Matthew and Luke were taken as edits to this. It looks like there was more work being done here. So let's just try to investigate this for a couple minutes. So we have that he's called the son of Alphaeus. So I don't know what the word Alphaeus means. So I looked it up, and most people think it comes from the word chalaf. So
Hmm.
chalaf is a regular Hebrew word. It means to change, to exchange. It actually would be cute. It means the exchanger. So, it means a person maybe exchanges some money. If you look at it from a perspective of he is someone who's changing to be closer to Christianity, he could be exchanging his pagan and or sinner ways. So a lot of times in Jewish texts, especially in the book of Ruth, the name is very meaningful. So it could be that this means exchange. I found that a little bit more difficult because historically we actually do have a separate non-Semitically based name which would be Alpheus, which means the mythical river. It means whiteness. So in short, Alpheus would either mean, if it's a Hebrew root or an Aramaic root, would mean the exchanger, the changer, the transitioner. If it has a Greek root, then it would mean the whiteness. So either way, I think it's very interesting. We actually do have a biblical character whose name whiteness, Lavan, Laban. I don't know what you call it.
Yeah,
Yes, that name means whiteness. And if anything, Jewish tradition is very critical of the fact that it calls whiteness. It means that like he tries to fool people with his whiteness, because whiteness is either going to be like he's so white it's a purity, and therefore he's above sin. He dresses in white, or it might be he's pretending to be without sin. So, anyways, all these things I think would be an interesting sub idea to talk about when you hear Alpheus. But Matthew doesn't even have any of this. So it seems that we do have another Alpheus, our son of Alpheus, namely James. James, the son of Alpheus, he's included as one of the disciples of Jesus in Mark 3:14, and that finishes at 3:19. So we have over here in 2:14 in Mark, with that Jesus is calling Levi to follow him. He's one of the disciples, and he does follow him. So, however, Mark never again talks about Levi ever again. So that is very complicated. If I was going to write a story about Isaac's life, and I said Isaac met this guy named Russ, and he asked him to follow him, and Russ followed Isaac, and then never mentioned again, that seems like so minimal, so unnecessary that it's silly that it was written. So a lot of people, when they look at the fact that Mark never again mentions this Levi, it's hard to understand why it was even included in the first place. Why take the trouble to say that he's anything if he's not going to be really involved again? Not only that, we see that in verse 317, Mark does burden himself with writing that James and John were actually brothers. And in 318, it doesn't mention any suggestion that Matthew was related to James or some Alpheus. So we have this weird situation where it looks like when I heard the story without looking inside, I always thought that just like Simon and Peter are the same person, one's the Hebraicized name and one's the Greekified name. So too, Matthew is either the Jewish, I'm not even sure which one's which. Matthew is either Jew or Greek name, and Levi is either the Greek or Jewish name, and he just has two names. I think that's how most people, and I don't know if that's in your tradition, is that what you maybe heard? That Matthew is just one name of the same guy named Levi? That's what I always heard.
Yeah, I think the last time we discussed Matthew 3, right? Matthew 3, when we spoke about Simon Peter, you highlighted that his name
Right.
is, that his, I think his Greek, his, what do you call it? His Hebrew name is Simon, or sorry, but his
Right. So Simon is a really good Hebrew name.
Hebrew name,
Shimon, it means
Shimon,
God hears.
the
And
Hebrew,
Peter is a really bad Hebrew name. When
bad
you hear
Hebrew
Peter,
name.
there's a word Peter in Hebrew, but
Uh-huh.
it means like opening of the womb, which is
Yeah.
probably not a name. So it makes sense. But over here, you don't have that benefit. Matthew, generally people will say is like Matthias or Matisyahu, which means God's gift. Like one of the Maccabees was a Matthew.
Oh,
So it's unclear what's
so you're
really happening
saying,
here.
Matthew means it's God's gift? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Matthew would be a Hebrew, like again, the Hebrew word is Matit Yahu, and generally people translate it as Matthias or Matthew. So most people look when they look at the etymology of the word Matthew, they feel it's also Hebrew. So Levi and Matthew are both Hebrew names. So to say one is the Greek name doesn't really work so well here because of that, where it works so well with Peter. And not only that, it said when we talked in chapter 3, it actually says Simon, who is also called Peter.
Okay.
We know what we also see this in the book of Esther, that Esther is one of the most Persian names possible. Esther is not Hebrew.
Hmm.
Esther means Ishtar, the goddess of one of the goddesses of the Babylonian pantheon. And it says her name was Hadassah, which is a good Hebrew name. So I think it's very common. So what's interesting when you look at the different traditions, so for example, mostly in Catholic tradition, there's believed to be two men who are named Alpheus, and those two Alpheuses had two kids. One of them was the father of the Apostle James, and the other was the father of Matthew, who is also Levi. So we first thing we do is say there's two Alpheuses if you're Catholic. So even though that Matthew and James are both described as the son Alpheus, that's fine. Sometimes there's two Isaacs in the world. That's not hard. But if you look at other traditions in Christianity, a lot of times they'll say that Matthew and James were brothers and that they were both the son of one Alpheus. So I just want to point out that the actual chronology or the actual identification of the people here, it's not so easy. And to say that Matthew is Levi is unclear. To say that Matthew is the son of Alpheus is unclear. To say that Levi is the son of the same Alpheus as James the son is unclear. So I just want to throw out all those questions for you. And just to conclude, just if we look at from the perspective of Markian priority, most likely, if I had to take a guess, what happened is that Mark and Luke, while they portray and they show Levi as the brother of James, the son of Alphaeus, none of the Gospels actually portray Matthew as the brother of James. So only if we want to believe that Matthew and Levi were actually the same person, can Matthew be said to be the brother of James? So it looks like to me that they're just trying to deal like Matthew is trying to deal with this. What I find most interesting about all this is that how can we not point out that the name of our book is Matthew? So historically, I think that it's unclear why this book is named Matthew. I know we talk about St. Matthew, and we talk about that at least eventually he was ascribed to be the author of this. But when you look at this one line, this is really our only mention of why it's Matthew. It's unclear why the name is Matthew. And if you look at our YouTube notes, we always you'll notice that I never call our verses that we're citing Matthew. And when you introduce us, you say the gospel according to Matthew or St. Matthew. Okay. So that's one topic down, the lack of clarity of identities. But now let's go to our favorite topic at hand, the history of tax collectors. So you already started off by saying that you don't like tax collectors. And what if or Christianity doesn't, or maybe first century Judaism doesn't like tax collectors? I personally have never met a tax collector. The main tax collector in my life is me. Because I take the money out of my paycheck, I collect it, and I send it to the federal government or to the state government or local government. And only when I buy local items and they have like was it, I forgot what it is in my area, 6.8 or 6.6%, they take it automatically. So why are tax collectors who are just doing their job, Isaac? It's not their fault. So bad. It's like I feel like it almost feels like to me that if you're angry at a surgeon for cutting off a wart or cutting off a cancer, well, it's a necessary evil. So why should we view tax collectors as so evil?
Yeah, I mean, some of again, some of the tax the Roman tax laws the Roman laws were high on taxation, and so this is all
You said just high taxation?
the high taxation,
So
right?
that's it. They're not
Yeah,
bad. If they
yeah.
had low
So
taxation, it'd be fine, you
yeah,
think?
so I mean, again, taxation. Again, I think we live in 20th century America with different taxation. I think based on what I've read so far, from what I've read from certain books, where taxation was high, and it was a big burden for the people to pay the taxes every year, and so these tax collectors who were Jewish, they were the arms of the Roman government to enforce or to collect taxes, and so in a way, people's anger was directed against them because
I
paying.
just feel like what you're saying is not so bad. You know, if the Romans set high taxes, that's not the Jewish people's fault. If the certain people were hired as policemen, tax collectors, firefighters, whatever, soldiers, in order to force the law, you could say Romans are inherently evil. That's a very, anachronistic kind of way to look at it. Like, you could definitely look at all the positive things Romans did. So let's just say they had high taxes and they hired Jews or they hired whoever to collect those taxes. I think it sounds like they're getting a bad rep. And I'm only pointing that out because it has to be worse than you're saying, I feel, Isaac. It has to be they're cutting off the heads of babies or they're doing something much worse. Because if they're only collecting high taxes, I don't think they'd get such a bad rep. That's my hypothesis.
Yeah, I think it depends on the amount of taxation, right? If you, again, I think,
That's not
again,
their fault, though. No matter what, it's like, then you should be angry at the Romans, not them.
yeah, but so again, at least back then, they cannot, again, being governed by the Romans, you cannot direct your anger towards Romans.
Uh,
So,
so,
these tax
so
collectors becomes agents of the government,
I know, but that's like vicarious anger. That's like beating up the person who's selling you the expensive car.
Yeah,
It's not
so
his fault.
then let me then they didn't have to be a tax collector, right? He could have chosen any profession, but he chose to do as a Jewish person to be a tax collector, which is the way to harass, to harass or to torture your own people. Wouldn't that be that is
Okay.
wouldn't you say
So
that
so I feel like we hear the question. Let me give you some historical background. Number one, as you know, after the Maccabean revolt, the land of Israel is for most part governed by the Jewish people until the year 65 BCE, a little bit earlier. And when the first that's in 65 BCE is when the Romans first organized taxes in that area that began by Pompey. So the first thing I want to note is that it's not inherent that you pay taxes to a foreign government. It's because the country of Judea was under the rule in the first century of Romans. So one thing, I think that people hate paying taxes, but they feel less bad about paying taxes when they know it fixes their road. But what if the taxes are being sent out to Rome? So that's one of the reasons I think taxes were much worse than regular taxes. Number two, that there are actually different kinds of tax. You get taxed on your farm, you get taxed on your land, you get taxed on your poll tax on who you are. So certain taxes were standard. For every person, you have to pay a certain tax. Whatever amount of crop you have, you pay a certain tax. But other taxes, there were auctions in order to win the right to tax. And then you had the Roman, I guess, military, Roman soldiers and Roman infrastructure behind you in order to make sure that you can collect. So let's imagine that I want to tax you, Isaac. I want at auction the right to tax the whole Stefan Raj family. And then I go and say, I know this is how much you grew and how much money you earned, but I need you to pay me $100 in tax no matter what. You say, I don't have that money. He goes, I'm sorry, I won at auction the right to tax you. And if you don't pay me, I'm A, going to take it from you. B, if I can't take it, I'm going to put you in jail. C, I'm going to have other people threaten you, possibly hurt you, possibly sell some people into slavery. But you say, I don't really owe that much. I actually didn't, I was unemployed this year. I made $0. And the person, me, who won this auction would say, it doesn't matter. I won the right to tax you, so you owe me the money. So I want you to take note of how this is infinitely more nefarious than just collecting taxes today. So the right to collect taxes just went to the highest bidder. So the people then, why would you bid on it? What's the point of bidding on taxes? To make the most amount of money possible. So we see that the New Testament people like Zacchaeus, who's found in Luke 19:1, he seems to be the chief over the tax collectors in the area near the Dead Sea, near Jericho. And Matthew, we see, was a person who worked as a tax collector. So we see that these people, namely, might have had a job as a tax collector. They might have been head tax collectors, and they definitely would have been in a situation that would have been torturous for the Jews. And it's specifically because of our first reason that it was imposed outward, it was viewed as a little bit probably to be a traitor to give the money, but you had to, so you did your best. So the fact that these Jewish tax collectors, or even there also obviously were non-Jewish tax collectors as well, but the fact that these tax collectors were doing this to their own people was viewed as specifically bad. And then when I mentioned like Zacchaeus in Luke 19:2, when he confessed to Jesus when he was converting, he said that I should probably give back all the money that I defrauded everyone. So we
Mhm.
see that another word to say a tax collector that defrauds is a thief. So
Mhm.
I think to say just a tax collector to strengthen or to, maybe to answer the question that we had from the start, it's not that they were tax collectors that made them evil. It was the fact that they were evil that made them evil, and then the
Mhm.
fact that they were being tax collectors with the way they carried out their evilness. So the fact that Zacchaeus was extorting people when he did it, and the fact that he thought maybe I should reimburse them was proof from the New Testament in Luke that it was so bad. I don't want to talk about the upcoming verses, but we'll see that tax collectors are just equated with sinners in the, verses 9:10 to 9:13, which we'll talk about in our next session. So we can put that off for now. But when you see that the attitude throughout of these tax collectors, it was definitely one that they weren't trustworthy. And even when we go to in Matthew 22:17, where they try to ask, when the Pharisees and other people try to ask, is it lawful to pay to pay a head tax to Caesar or not? It's clearly trying to set up that like taxes were something that were like a necessary evil in that society that they try to deal with. Okay, so taxes are bad. How bad were they? I thought it'd be really fun to find some Talmudic sources about how bad taxes were. And there's so many fun sources in Jewish tradition about how bad tax collectors really are. So I'll start with one, which I thought I didn't remember this one, but I think it's so funny. So number one, in Mishnah Taharot 7:6, if tax collectors entered your house becomes tameh, becomes unclean, like you're touching a dead body if he enters your house. However, if thieves enter your house, only the part of the house in which the feet of the thieves walk on becomes unclean. So who's worse, thieves or tax collectors?
Tax collectors.
Tax collectors are worse. And don't forget, when we say impure, impure is just a spiritual thing. It's something that has to do with theology and religion. So what we're saying is that seems to be an imposed punishment, that the fact that you let a tax collector at your house means no one else can now come into your house, which I think is so interesting. Okay, so that's one fun source. I do three or four more. Um, so there's a famous case where what happens if a tax collector comes to your house and and you say, I have no money. And then the tax collector says, I know you have some money. And he goes, I don't have any money. So he goes, swear to me. So what we find in Jewish tradition is that not only are you allowed to swear, but the tax collector is treated, this is in Mishnah Nedarim 3:4, that he's treated like the list goes murderers, robbers, and tax collectors. They come to your house and they see a pile of fruit. Okay. And the tax collector says, I see you harvested your thing, your harvest. So you're allowed to tell the murderer, the robber, and the thief, because you believe that they have at least a sense of religiosity, that these fruits were already set aside to be given to priests, Cohens, as the formal 2% tax that Judaism levies for priests on your fruits, even if it's not true, and even if it belongs to someone else, and even if it's not true. So then we have an argument. Beit Shammai says you're only allowed to make you're not allowed to make the most important kind of vow. You only make one kind of vow. And Beit Hillel says lie however you want. And then Beit Shammai comes back and says that you should try to avoid, just like try to fake it. And Base Hill says, just lie in God's name, lie however you want, because these guys are so bad, whatever you could do to get rid of them. So there's another story in Bava Kamma 113a in the Babylonian Talmud that says that the Mishnah says that a person cannot exchange money of tax collectors. Why? Let's say a tax collector has 4 quarters and you want $1. Let me change, but the money the tax collector has was thieved, was stolen. So it must be that any money that he has, you can't access because you assume he must have stolen it and extorted people in order to get it. Okay, last source, just for the sake of it. So Nedarim 28a, it says that there's a case where a person makes a promise in order to protect his interests, and the law system says that the vow takes effect in order to deceive. That's allowed to do. So if I promise that this money is designated for something else, or if I say any kind of promise in order just to lead you off the track, that would be allowed. And then the Gemara asks the question, the Talmud asks the question, but Judaism holds that you're not allowed to just lie. That the law of the land is such that the tax collector has the right to collect the money, then Judaism should have to follow it. And here, I just thought you'd find this interesting. Here's how he answers. So Shmuel, a very famous Amora, is quoted as saying that the only time that you're not allowed to lie, you're not allowed to trick the thief, the taxpayer, is in a case where the tax collector does not fall when does not follow the rule of the land, but takes as much as he fits. So we see in the Talmud that we differentiate between different tax collectors, is what you would expect to find. Some of them might have done stuff legally, and therefore you might have more of a responsibility to treat them normally. But when they're lying or when they're thieving, then you do not. So what we see in Judaism is that A, they make things impure. B, you're allowed to swear in God's name that something's not the case. You're allowed to lie to them outright. You're allowed to do anything you can to make sure that they don't aren't able to take your money because you assume that they are just stealing. So I thought that's like so interesting when you see from that perspective. So now let's just like to conclude. So why is Jesus having a conversation with his tax collector when we keep in mind that we had several follow me or don't follow me stories? Why is this story inherently from the start a follow me story? And he gets up and follows him. What is Jesus trying to do or trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so in this case, right, Matthew has not indicated any interest in want to follow him. He's never said I want, but he voluntarily says that like Jesus invites him to follow me. In the other cases where he said, "Don't follow me," like go do these things. What exactly is he trying to say? I think in this case, probably Matthew is trying to say that Jesus has authority over again, that even someone even as bad as a tax collector, and as as based on what he said, right, a thief is better than a tax, or a thief is better than a tax collector because a tax collector can make things so impure. And so, is he alluding to that? Is Matthew alluding to that Jesus has authority to make things which are impure pure, or authority over also things which the world might think is completely unredeemable?
Yeah, but I guess the question is, I definitely agree with you, but I guess I don't know what you mean by authority there. I feel like was he doing this because Matthew deserved this, or was he trying to teach some lesson?
So, okay, when you say deserve or teach him a lesson, right? Like, what did Matthew do here? Like, Matthew didn't say, I want to follow. He was just sitting there, and some guy says, follow me, right? I mean, that's what it says. And then and somehow it sounds as though he has no control over it. When he said, follow me, he rose and he followed him. So I'm not clear, like, what exactly did Matthew do? Like, was he just, like, did he have a choice, or was he acting in a world where if someone says go, you go because you don't have the sense of volition to say, I don't want to go, or I don't feel like going, or I didn't ask, or I didn't sign up for this.
So, because your question is so strong, I think maybe the way that we should look at it is that it's this story. I think whenever anyone reads this story, they hyper focus on Matthew and they say, look at him. He followed him, and then they sit at dinner and they had other people. It seems to me the main focus was not that Matthew followed him, but the fact that Jesus asked Matthew to follow him.
Well, that's right.
And I think that the tax collector, prostitutes, sinners, evil people were all viewed as people that it's not worth to have a conversation with, or even more, that it wasn't socially acceptable to have a conversation with. A lot of times when we think of lepers, we think of these are people who are meant to be outside the camp. When we think of prostitutes, they have to sit by themselves at the side of the road. When we think of sinners, people who can't be invited to play with your children. So the fact that Jesus was doing socially unacceptable things was itself the element that he was trying to carry out. He was trying to show a subversive social arrangement that the very foundations of how you see a social hierarchy, let it be priests or kings or scribes at the top and poor and tax collector and sinners at the bottom, was something that should be reorganized. And when we see in the upcoming verses that the Pharisees um, I think that when we see the Pharisees in a lot of these stories, they're definitely meant to be the other side of the story. They're meant to be the person who questions what's happening. But I think the Pharisees here would be, as opposed to the norm, as opposed to the evil ones, I think the Pharisees are almost always representing the norm. What we saw the Pharisees in the last story, it was the Pharisee said, how could you forgive his sins? You know, the power. And now we see, how can you let these things? So I think one of the things that we should maybe correct is that the Pharisees are just the general group, I think, for what everyone else is doing and everyone else is thinking. And that itself is something that Jesus rejects. He is uninterested in seeing and doing and feeling and experiencing and carrying out what other people are doing. So for me, the story of Matthew is that he he was just walking along, Jesus. That's the opening line. It wasn't something that he planned. It was saying that I want the people who everyone hates to be part of my team, not because they matter, but because I want people to understand that the only way to reverse this social hierarchy is to kind of start anew and see everyone anew, and everyone should be part of the team.
Yeah, so Rabbi, so just thinking this through, right? So, earlier we saw where Jesus works in this whole new narrative, as in he believes the kingdom of heaven is here, it's here or now, but we didn't, it was not clear whether he meant metaphorically or he meant like here or now, right? So, but he was working from a different reality. And so if he's working in that reality, is it also saying that if he said follow him, did Matthew have a choice in that of saying yes or no, or like in a physical world, we all have a choice, right? I can say we want to do something, let's do it. You can say I don't want to do it, or I will do it later, yes, no. But did Matthew have any sense of real choice in the situation, given what we've seen so far, where Jesus is working in this different reality of, different reality where the kingdom of heaven is here, like it's here and now, and things are different.
So again, I agree. It's unclear what Matthew was thinking. When we saw Matthew, let's say 4:19, and we saw the case that he said to the two disciples, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." So I'm not sure like how important that command was. So it's unclear like how much he means like follow me versus let's have a conversation. Like if I said to you right now, Isaac, follow me, and then that's not like a promise the rest of your life to do everything I say. So it's unclear about how important really all this is. But we've had this many times, right? We like this. How many times we had it? We had follow me in 4:19. And he
Mhm,
said, follow me and I'll make you fishers men. We have follow me in 8:22, a couple of verses ago. Jesus said, follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead.
mhm.
We have follow me right here. So we have three follow me's like pretty close to one another. And they're very, very different situations. You know, um, one was a scribe, one was a tax collector, and one were fishermen. So it doesn't seem like he has any algorithm for trying to figure out when he says follow me versus not. And again, like obviously there's lots of other situations where he says follow, even in like was it John 1:43, the next day Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, follow me. He says follow me a lot. This is not like a thing that's uncommon to
I
see.
think it's
So
different in the sense that it's particular. It's directed to certain individuals, and it's more hyper focused. Like you follow me. It's not everyone following me. Like you Ras follow me or you Matthew follow me. Right? In that sense, it's very particular. And
I
but
mean, he says it to so many people. He says it to the disciples also in Matthew 16:24. He says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So it's unclear. Also in Matthew 19:21, Jesus said to him, if you would be perfect, go sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me.
so when you say follow me, right? Was he just inviting them to put on the Jesus beer goggles, or was he saying follow me
So I was saying we don't know.
as in like I want you to come, like just follow like blindly, just
So,
follow
so that's
after
why
me?
I think I know this. It almost sounds like a little agnostic to say this, but I think the main idea of follow me is doesn't speak to the person, but speaks about the speaker. Jesus by Jesus saying follow me, it's showing his attitude towards the tax collectors. It shows the attitude towards the disciples. It shows the attitude towards fishermen. It shows the attitude, and it's interesting. So when he says don't follow me, when he says go home, it's also meaningful. So I don't think we have enough evidence to figure out the main reason for these things, but I think we do have this evidence to say that Jesus wanted to dine and interact with tax collectors, prostitutes, sinners, and the bottom caste of society and the people who are viewed as socially unacceptable. And I think that was his agenda. And one of the things that I think we sometimes forget, I know it sounds subversive to say that, but the verse that probably shows up the most in the Bible, I think 36 times, is saying like worry about the strangers in your land. Worry about orphans, worry about widows. So those are the verses that probably show up the most. So this idea that one ought to have the highest concern for widows, orphans, strangers, and people who are downtrodden is definitely very, very biblical. It's super biblical. It's definitely something that would have been a strong advocate, but it's something that's very easily forgotten. As the reason that it has to be you have to be reminded so often to care about those people is because those are the first people you throw away. Okay, Isaac, on that note.
Your Rabbi, on that note, we'll have a happy pre-Shabbos and
Oh, there you go. You got it. Okay.